Finally, after over a week of waiting, we got episode 3 of Daredevil Born Again. Now, I know it's a little impatient of me to say, oh, finally, but, you know, for us Daredevil fans, it's very tiring to keep waiting week after week for these episodes. But we've gotten episode 3, so this is my review. But just before we get actually into it, there's not much to really mention because not many things actually happened in this episode. Not many Easter eggs or references, no action sequences whatsoever, but there is a very, very major scene that happens at the very end of the episode that I will get to later in the video. But just a warning, this will be a video mainly reviewing the type of story that we were given and the type of character development that we were given for Matt Murdock and the White Tiger. But now with that kind of lengthy intro out of the way, let me just get into my thoughts for this episode. Now, story-wise, it was really, really good. Now, of course, it did kind of feel like a court show, but this is kind of focusing on Matt Murdock in the lawyer side of things, you know, playing more into the lawyer by day instead of the vigilante by night, you know, and I do appreciate that, but at times, yes, it can be boring because you just want Daredevil back into the suit and fighting, but you're not gonna get that, but yet you're not gonna get any action either, because like I said, this is mainly courtroom drama, and it's about dealing with the aftermath of Hector Ayala's murder of, or should I say accidental murder of one of the cops in New York. But there was several story points that were kind of important that you kind of had to pay attention for. They weren't like major things that really happened because nothing really major, like I said, happened in this episode really until the very end. But yeah, just like stories of corrupted cops and basically evidence that is no good caused Matt to actually tell the court that Hector Ayala is the White Tiger. But of course this did help Hector's case due to the fact that he was losing, and even Matt explained it in the cell later that night that he had to because he was losing, you know, because it's very hard because there's no real stand to make against police officers who are corrupt and a witness who won't simply talk. And no idea why, actually. That was a quite stupid story element that he just wouldn't talk, but it did make it interesting because then it kind of backed Matt into a corner where he did need to address that Hector Ayala was the White Tiger, so that was an interesting way to set up that major story point within this episode. But story-wise, this episode from the very beginning to the very end was extremely entertaining, because if you know what this show is trying to do, because it's Daredevil Born Again, it's not just Daredevil. The Netflix series did tell like what he'd be, which is a vigilante at night and a lawyer by day. That's what those 3 seasons were. But in Daredevil Born Again, he goes through being Daredevil, but then losing Foggy causing him to stop, as losing his friend was the line that was crossed. And yeah, so Daredevil Born Again is kind of like symbolizing him just starting from scratch and just letting the system handle it, unlike what he was doing in the previous show where he would not ever let the system handle it. He was always Daredevil, but he was always Daredevil mixing with spending time with his friends Foggy and Karen. But when Foggy died, there was really no reason for him to be Daredevil, and Matt definitely thought that. But you could just see his choices kind of like coming back to him, and he's clearly regretting his choice to stop being Daredevil, because there's this really awesome scene where he just walks into the empty court, which beautiful shot, by the way. The cinematography is phenomenal in this show. But moving on past that, yeah, he just sits in the courtroom similar to how he would sit in like the church from the original Daredevil series, and he was like playing around and fidgeting with the devil horn that he still kept that Karen gave him in episode 1. But yeah, you could clearly see he misses the mask and he really wants to help people again, but he just maybe doesn't want to get back to that side of him. Of course, I feel like me and probably a bunch of other Daredevil fans definitely thought that Matt would get into the suit again after episode 2, because maybe Matt missed that awesomeness of fighting off bad guys and protecting the good, but no, he's still like dedicated to trying to leave the Daredevil persona behind him, you know, to not only avoid starting beef with Fisk, but of course that's not really the definitive reason why he's not Daredevil anymore, because truthfully he's not afraid of Fisk and Fisk isn't afraid of him. They just leave each other alone. But after what happens at the end of this episode, Daredevil is definitely gonna come back, and that is 100%. But now moving on to what actually does happen at the end of the episode, we get to see Hector Ayala basically make it out of court with 0 charges, because like the best thing about this court episode was the beautifully well done suspense scene and sequences, because this entire episode was built off so much suspense, but sometimes in shows or movies there's such thing as too much suspense, but in episode 3 there was just enough suspense to keep the viewer on the edge of their seat, and that is really, really good, and I think is definitely one of the best things that this show has done over the course of 3 episodes so far. But anyway, he is proven not guilty for the murders, and of course him being a vigilante kind of helped his case. Like I said earlier in the review, it definitely helped his case because there was so many witnesses, so many people that Hector saved and helped in the White Tiger persona, so he kind of had basically the entire town and the entire city backing him up, including the cops, because he did save several police officers as well. And I think that is a beautiful way to kind of show that Hector is such a well-beloved, essentially replaced and new Daredevil. But of course he is not for long, as Matt did tell Hector in that cell the night before the trial ended that if they are gonna go through with this, if they are gonna fully start using his vigilante persona in court, then he can never go back to it. Of course Hector's like, oh, this is who I am, which who wouldn't be? Daredevil, Matt Murdock himself, for the first 3 seasons of Daredevil, could not muster the strength to say that I'm anything except for the man without fear, except for Daredevil, you know? And there's just so many similarities between Matt Murdock and Hector Ayala, because they're both vigilantes, they're both stubborn in that way, not wanting to give up even though they have to, and it would make sense for them, but they didn't. And for Daredevil, it was the death of Foggy that made him stop, but for Hector, it was his own death that unfortunately put an end to his reign, when ultimately at the end of the episode he suits up, which the suit looked beautiful, by the way, just so awesome, and he is lured in by the screams of just random people. We could assume it was played maybe on a radio to lure him into an alleyway near like a park or something, where somebody who looks like Frank Castle's the Punisher comes out and points a gun to Hector's head and shoots him, and unfortunately that's a headshot, so we all know Hector is dead. And plus, the actor for Hector Ayala unfortunately passed away in December of 2023 due to cancer, which I actually did not know going into this, so I was like, oh, we're set for maybe a full season of seeing the White Tiger, maybe he's gonna be a villain and fight Daredevil in the later episodes. No, the actor died during filming for season 1, and that could play a role in why they killed his character off, but I don't think that is the likely option, because it definitely makes sense for the story that Hector died, because we all know Matt eventually comes back to his Daredevil persona, but we've not gotten a clear reason why and how he did. But with the death of Hector Ayala now, he has a reason to come back as Daredevil, because obviously probably the next episode is going to be all about Matt trying to find out who and why Hector was killed and who did it, of course. But at the end of the episode, as the murderer walks off, you could see light get shined on their chest, which shows a skull, but obviously it's not the Punisher's skull. It looks very similar to the Punisher's skull, but if you really look at it, it's the same skull that those corrupted cops had on their wrist when they attacked Matt. So clearly it's not the Punisher himself. It's probably just people pretending to be the Punisher or admire the Punisher, like people who admire the Punisher, and we all know how Frank Castle feels about those people. He hates them and he kills them. So this is like a perfect way to now incorporate Frank Castle back into the story of Daredevil, because now probably Matt will find the guy who killed Hector and probably think that Frank has something to do with it, therefore him tracking Frank down and probably having a fight with him, but eventually coming to terms that Frank had nothing to do with it, and then them both teaming up to find the people who did it, and them, like the people who did it, like the organization who did it, who look very similar to the Punisher, maybe those will be the villains on top of Wilson Fisk, because we all know at the end of the episode the person who ultimately called the shot on Hector was Wilson Fisk, because he made a very strict rule that no vigilantes shall be in New York anymore, you know, and he made that pretty clear in episode 1 when he was talking to Matt. Like, he was like, if you do go back to your previous activities, I will have to retaliate. But of course Daredevil didn't, but then after the entire court case, Hector Ayala was revealed to be the White Tiger, so of course now Fisk doesn't want that in his city, so he calls the shot on Hector to have him killed, and that is definitely where the corrupt cop who are impersonating the Punisher definitely come in. But yeah, that was a very shocking ending, you know. I was sitting on my couch watching it, it was the end of the episode, it was like a freaking 9:40, 9:50, and I was like half asleep, half awake, and then I heard the gunshot and I was like, what the hell just happened? And then I see Hector drop and I was like, damn it, because honestly I did think that he'd be more of a major character, but they just killed him just like that. But the shock value that they are putting with these characters' death, as well as making their character character death makes sense for the story is just so well done. Because usually when shows or movies do death for shock value, it's just shock value. It has no emotional impact to the story, no purpose. But Hector Ayala's death and Foggy Nelson's death actually had purpose for the story. Foggy's death being the reason why Matt stops being Daredevil, and the death of Hector Ayala brings the Punisher back into the swing of things and maybe has Daredevil and the Punisher team up. I mean, not really maybe. We've seen set photos. They're clearly gonna team up, but we just don't know when and how long it will really take to get there. But yeah, overall, episode 3 was still so good, and they're really doing good with this show, and this is hands down the best Disney Plus show ever. You know, it is a really good continuation for the Daredevil original series that happened on Netflix. It's just so great, and I cannot wait for next week to see what they do with episode 4. But yeah, these are my thoughts for episode 3 of Daredevil Born Again. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Like, subscribe, comment what you guys thought of the death of Hector Ayala. Were you shocked by it? And your overall opinions on episode 3 of Daredevil Born Again. But this is the end of the video. Goodbye, guys.